PowerPoint 2 for Health Records Management. Documentation Requirements, Chapter 4. So we start here on page 85. First slide talks about Joint Commission and the requirements. The Joint Commission states that only authorized individuals can make entries in the medical record. Anyone that documents has to be credentialed or have the authority and the right to document. Services as rendered must be documented to prove that care was even provided and that good medical care is supported by patient record documentation. Remember, the Joint Commission is kind of like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. Joint Commission is an organization that is voluntary. We don't have to comply by their rules, but if we choose to comply by their rules, we get this golden seal of approval for our facility. It means we really prove quality care, and we get a plaque that we get to hang on the wall. So next time you go into a hospital or a clinic, take a look around at the things that are hanging on the walls. Maybe it'll make sense. Maybe you'll find the Joint Commission that they're accredited. Authentication rules, meaning anything that's written and authenticated in the medical record or published by CMS. The title on this slide is huge. If it wasn't documented, it wasn't done. If it's not reported in that medical record, we cannot bill it out to insurance company. We cannot get paid for it. It didn't happen. That is one statement that we will say over and over and over in our class. If a provider performs that service but doesn't document it in the chart, that patient or the third-party payer, so that's your insurance company, can refuse to pay for the service. So what happens to the charge? Missing documentation can result in problems if the record needs to be admitted as evidence in a court of law. See your example on page 85. It's kind of interesting. All entries must or require authentication, which means an entry is signed by the person who wrote it, the author. Auto-authentication involves a provider authenticating a dictated report prior to its transcription. It's not really consistent with proper authentication procedures. Auto-authentication is something that's kind of a no-no. It shouldn't be done. It needs to be signed after everything is typed up so that the patient entries can be read and understood, make sure that they're correct before they're signed off on. Provider documentation responsibilities. Authentication of the patient record entries. Signatures, where your provider, and when I mean provider, I'm saying is it your doctor, your physician assistant, your nurse practitioner. They sign with their first initial, their last name, and then their title, credential, or discipline. A counter signature is something we'll come across. It's a form of authentication by an individual in addition to the signature by the original author of an entry. So this in addition to is super important. It's a second signature if you want to write a note next to that. It's a second signature. There's examples on page 86. Someone like a resident, so someone who is not a doctor yet but is still in the teaching mode, can do some of the work, but needs someone who supervises them to also sign off. A telephone order is a verbal order. It's taken over the phone, makes sense there, by a qualified professional, for example, maybe an RN from a physician. Only for emergency situations, and a counter signature is needed as soon as possible. A voice order is also known as a verbal order, where they dictate an order in the presence of a responsible person. The instance where we might have this is where you work at a nursing home and the provider doesn't sit right there in an office. And we have a patient that has something happen, gets a fever. We will call the provider. The provider will, call back or get on the phone and say, yes, give Gladys, 2 extra strength Tylenol and call me in 2 hours with her temperature. That's a telephone order. A verbal order is taken over the phone by that nurse. They go and do it. They mark it in the medical record. And as soon as the doctor can get there, not meaning today, but usually it's within 24 hours. It's not a real rule on that. It just says as soon as possible. that provider needs to come and actually sign that order saying, yes, I did tell him to do this over the phone. Initials. A complete signature that matches initials must be included on the same form or a separate signature legend. It's a document or a listing that's maintained in our health information department to identify the author by full signature when initials are used. So if we're going to use initials to sign in the chart, we've got to have a signature legend sitting in the health information department with us, filed, where it says AGS means Amanda Grace Stortz, RHIT, and she works in the health information department. So every time somebody's under the chart and reads something that I wrote and sees my initials AGS, they have no idea who AGS is. They can go to the health information department, pull up the list, look for AGS, and say, oh, that's Amanda. She works in medical records. I'm going to go find her. I have a question. Okay? That's important. Fax signatures. Fax is kind of funky. It can be accepted by facilities as allowed by state and federal regulations. It won't be taken in court. Okay? If it's called to court, it won't be taken in court if your original is available. Electronic signatures. It's a generic form or term. It refers to the various methods of an electronic document and how it can be authenticated. So your name might be typed at the end of an email message. It might be an image of a handwritten signature. It might be a secret code or a PIN number that you type in and that automatically signs electronically for you. You can use fingerprints, different things. There's a couple of examples there on page 87 as well. Signature stamps. We don't use much of these anymore. The big deal with signature stamps, and I can have you read through the slide, but only that person gets to use that stamp. I'll tell you, when I started working at my clinic, we had a signature stamp from my provider, and the front desk lady kept them. She had like 3 of them. So anytime anything needed to be signed by the doctor, they just took it up to the front desk lady, who didn't have any medical education at all, and just stamped whatever was needed. Really, really bad. When I got there, I said, this is what I learned about signature stamps in school, and I think we need to change this process. Abbreviations. So this is kind of a big deal, and some of your homework has to deal with this too. Healthcare facilities need to establish a policy as to which abbreviations or acronyms or symbols can be documented in the medical record. Then they need to maintain an official listing, an official abbreviation list. There is an example. If you turn to page 88 in your textbook, or 89, excuse me, there is a listing. It says Sunny Valley Hospital Abbreviation List. And there's abbreviations in there. And if I was in class, I would put up on the board the example D/C. Okay, D/C. It can mean, as you're reading, D/C, discontinue, discharge, dressing change. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people within the same facility, just different departments. For physical therapy, it might mean that they need to do a dressing change. For the nursing staff, it might mean that they need to discontinue this medicine or discharge the patient. You have to be really, really careful with abbreviations that you use in your healthcare facility. Joint Commission standards do not explicitly require an approved list of abbreviations, but it's something that you should do. There's national patient safety goals out there. They prohibit the use of dangerous abbreviations, acronyms, and symbols in patient records because they could be misinterpreted. I mean, it sounds pretty basic. Legibility of patient record entries. This slide talks about all entries in the record have to be legible. If an entry is illegible, it needs to be rewritten by its author, and it can be not paid for. The rewritten entry can state, it's clarified, put the same exact information in there, and it needs to be documented on the next available line. A note that I have on my slides is legibility impacts the patient care. If you have a nurse that can't read the order, it can be carried out improperly. Also, third-party payers, or again your insurance companies, can deny payment if they can't read the chart. Timeliness of patient record entries. Patient record entries need to be documented as soon as possible after care is provided so as to increase the accuracy of the information recorded. Joint Commission requires patient records to be completed 30 days after that patient's discharged, at which time they become delinquent records. So 30 days after discharge, that means that's an inpatient, a person that stayed in the hospital, okay? Medicare has these rules, and they're called the COP, the Conditions of Participation. They require that a history and physical, that's your first big visit when you get admitted to the hospital, is due 30 days after, or 30 days before the patient comes in. So say I'm scheduled to have knee surgery September 15th. Okay, it's something scheduled and planned ahead. I can get it done ahead of time, up to 30 days. Or within 24 hours after that patient is admitted to the hospital. That's a really tight time frame. That's one we really, really have to pay attention to. Okay, there's a couple of examples in the books too, talking about delinquent charts and how to do it. There's a little math involved here. You want to take the total number of charts on top and divide by the total number of discharges on the bottom. Amending the patient record. There is a lot to do with amending the record and how to do it and how to do it correctly. A lot of the information here is on page 92, and it's listed here on the slide. One thing I have written in, absolutely no whiteout. We absolutely never ever use whiteout. Here's some more information about amending the electronic record. There's an example there on that page 92 as well. We're going to do a couple of those for homework too. And the last slide talks about any information and adding to the information. You can amend the electronic record. That means you change something. You can addend, see those two words, amending the medical record and addending. Addendum is adding. You see that first word, add. In addendum, you're adding additional information about a previous documentation or error. Avoid incorrect interpretation of information. The purpose is to provide additional information, hence the add and addendum. Additional information, not changing the documentation. That's all for PowerPoint 2. It goes all the way up to exercise 2 in your textbook. I want you to complete exercise 4-2 out of the textbook. So obviously you need to write it down on a piece of paper. It's on page 93. So it's questions 1 through 10. And I also want you to turn in your lab books. And I want you to complete out of your lab books the lab assignment 4-5. So in your lab book, it's called Amending the Patient Record. It's on page 35. When you look at page 35, lab assignment 4-5, it says instructions. Review the section entitled Amending the Patient Record found in Chapter 4 of your textbook. We just went through that on the PowerPoint. Okay? It says for added information, you can go to our AHEMA website and look at these 2 practice briefs. You don't have to do that. You're fine. Number 2 is where you really start. Review the patient record entries in figure 4-3. It's the next page, or it starts the next couple pages. Determine whether each one of these is appropriately or inappropriately amended and provide justification for each. So page 36 is a page that you can rip out and hand in, or it just shows you how to document your information to hand in for me the next class period. But you can see case 1, you need to report on case 1. Is it done correctly or not, and why? Case 2, is it done correctly or not, and why? Case 3, all the way up to case 10. So after your PowerPoint review, do 4-2 in the textbook and 4-5 in the lab workbook, and we will see you the next time in class. We don't have school on Monday because it's a holiday, so we'll see you next Wednesday.